Welcome to Preceptor Module 3, Learning Styles and Teaching Strategies, brought to you by the Montana Center to Advance Health Through Nursing, or the Montana CON, Academic Progression in Nursing Grant, funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The Montana CON is the official state action coalition of the Future of Nursing Campaign for Action in Montana, and the co-leads for the Montana CON are Casey Blumenthal. He's the Vice President of the Montana Hospital Association, and Cynthia Gustafson is the Executive Director of the Montana Board of Nursing. And there is a website that you should know about. If you Google montanacon.org, there will be resources on the website that you can access for these modules along the way. My name is Sandra Kuntz, and I'm a member of the faculty at Montana State University and the co-project director of the APIN grant. I'm pleased to welcome you to this third webinar for preceptors. The purpose of the 5 modules in this series is to enhance preceptor effectiveness and satisfaction with the precepting experience. Studies by Henderson et al. 2006, Parsons 2007, Burns and Northcutt 2009, and Duteau in 2012 suggest that educational offerings improve preceptor self-efficacy, confidence, effectiveness, and satisfaction with the role. Criteria for successful completion of this webinar include attending the entire webinar for Module 3, reading the assigned chapters in Ulrich, and for this module it's chapters 2 and 3, and affirming completion of the reading at the end of the webinar, and completing and submitting the evaluation form at the end of the webinar. So far in this series, we've covered roles and relationships in Module 1, communication in Module 2. Now this module, and Module 4 is planning for precepting experience, the learning experience, and Module 5 is all about evaluation and feedback. Although we are bringing you the latest evidence related to preceptor practice, we don't believe we will raise or answer all questions you might want to ask. For this reason, we have created a password-protected blog or a discussion board for Modules 1 through 4, with 1 contact hour awarded per module per blog. This space is highly recommended and provides a place for your reflection and documentation of your precepting experiences and the application of information from this module. Sharing your insights, thoughts, questions related to precepting will enlighten all of us. So after completion of this module, please consider blogging. I just want to mention that there is no conflict of interest for any planner or presenter involved with this activity. Contact hours are awarded by the Montana Nurses Association. Primary objective of this module is to describe teaching learning strategies to improve precepting performance, competence, and confidence, and of course your effectiveness as a preceptor. In this hour, we'll talk a little bit about mechanisms of adult learning, present 6 adult learning theories that specifically apply to precepting, present strategies that you can use based on learning styles, and some assessment tools and precepting strategies available to you. Throughout this module, I will mention a number of evidence-based resources. The link to all the resources can be found in Module 3 on the Montana CON website under the Resource tab. And so I just want to remind you about this availability. There will be a lot of resources that you can use, including the storyboard that goes with this PowerPoint, and some of the articles and tools that I'm going to mention throughout this presentation. Del Bueno, 2005, replicated a study first conducted in 1997 and found that just 35% of new graduates met entry-level competency expectations of employing agencies. We know that preceptors often serve as the bridge over the experience competency gap. A qualitative study by Spiva et al. 2013 found that newly licensed RNs flourish with preceptors that have the expertise to guide, support, nurture, and provide extensive hands-on clinical opportunities to help preceptees hone specific knowledge and Another study by Sharpneck, Moon, and Wade noted that, and that's a 2014 article, noted that although 86% of nursing programs offer an immersion or capstone experience to facilitate socialization and assist in transition to practice, schools often fail to effectively prepare preceptors for their clinical educational responsibilities. And that's on page 255 of that article. And I can assure you that, that this does exist. Schools, academic centers, do not do a good job of preparing preceptors. And I think that our awareness of that is part of the reason that we are really intent on improving our outreach to the preceptors we serve. And one other article, Duteau in 2012, found that preceptor education improved preceptor satisfaction as well as transition to practice outcomes for students and new nurses. The purpose of this module is to discuss how learning occurs in adults, since this is the foundation and basis of precepting, according to Ulrich, and that's on page 17 of your reading. The inquiry questions for this module include: how will an understanding of learning theories and learning styles enhance your work as a preceptor? Second, what competencies are associated with cognitive, affective, and psychomotor domains of learning and the learning style of preceptors and preceptees? Next, how does your organization facilitate or impede novice or advanced beginner progress? Fourth, what preceptor clinical strategies are most effective for developing preceptee competence and improved expertise? And finally, what can we learn from 1-minute manager, 1-minute praising, and 5-minute preceptor? So the definition of pedagogy is the method and practice or art and science of teaching. Andragogy is the art and science of teaching adults. We often think of pedagogy as teaching children, and in fact, pedagogy is an approach that is used for teaching children. But the two approaches are very different, as you can see some of the key ideas behind each. Sometimes adults learn via pedagogy, and other times they best learn and are taught using principles of andragogy. So in terms of this slide, you can see that in pedagogy, the learner is dependent, usually on a teacher. Passive learning takes place. The experience is rather prescriptive, and there is external motivation of the learner, primarily by a teacher, and instructor evaluation is very important. In andragogy, the adult is more self-directed. Self-evaluation is really important and happens consistently and constantly. The learner is an active learner. There is a lot of application to reality that's required. There are questions about how does this apply to real life. And primarily, there is internal motivation. So the adult learner will want to learn and have that internal mechanism in place. So I actually had an example that I witnessed last week in our program. We have, in our program, first semester seniors learn to start IVs. And the clinical instructor, using excellent pedagogical sound practices, arrange the lab, talks to the class about the theory and practice of IV starts, invites an expert from the hospital to demonstrate the new equipment, assigns people to groups for psychomotor experience, and then evaluates and provides guidance as the students attempt to start IVs on each other. And so this is an excellent example of pedagogy at its best. This happens, and this is how we start the experience of learning a new skill. However, this particular group last week moved toward andragogy. At the end of the session, they decided, as a group of 8 students, decided they needed more practice. So the students moved their learning from pedagogy to andragogy on their own. They arranged for faculty oversight, because that's our requirement, no invasive procedures without faculty oversight. They invited their OB instructor from a previous semester and me to help with the lab. They were very self-directed during the lab. They used a lot of peer and self-evaluation. They were active learners. They imagined their psychobiological response in the practice setting. If they were actually, instead of looking at one of us as their arm that they were trying to start an IV on, they thought about how they might feel if they were actually working with a patient. They were really internally motivated in the practice, and they were actually teaching each other. So if you compare the two approaches, the learner experience, readiness, orientation, and motivation in this list that compares pedagogy and andragogy, you can see the difference in these styles and recognize which style is best in a given situation. And like I said, we use all of this as we teach nurses to become nurses. And you can see at the bottom of the screen on the PowerPoint the slide of the IV Start Lab, and that was the lab where the teacher was actually working with the student. But this was a very different picture the next week when they designed the lab for themselves. I think this is an important slide to actually think about your preceptees and the style. Most will come with a certain amount of awareness of their situation and what they want to learn and what they need to learn. And so you want to learn to use that as much as possible and just be aware of these two different styles which might apply. There was actually another example I was going to provide you on that. I think about this when I think about how adults learn in the practice settings. Today, as unit councils tackle quality improvement projects, this works make me think of Peter Singe's Fifth Discipline, The Art and Practice of the Learning Organization, 1990 publication. He describes a learning organization as a place where teams encounter a meaningful change and an experience that is generated from a problem that needs resolution. And that's adult learning. That's andragogy. So on this screen, you can see 6 assumptions. And this is Knoll's work, 1973. He updated his work in 84 and 87. He had identified 6 assumptions of adult learning. The first are the need to know. You know you're working with an adult when there is that need to know why the information is important. The second is self-concept, self-assuredness, self-directedness. If you think about the students that came back and said, we need more practice. We want more of, and they designed it. They designed what they wanted and what they needed, and they were very self-directed. The third assumption is that there is an important role for experience for the adult. There is an accumulation of experience that the adult brings. It's a broad base on which to connect new learning. So you really can connect there very well because adults do come with experience. The fourth, readiness to learn. Readiness is related to perceived need to learn. Nursing students may not have the same excitement about statistics as they do IV starts, but if they are conducting a rapid critical appraisal of a research study that could change their practice, they might be interested in the statistic that was used to determine significance. And so it all is what people are ready for, what they see value in, if they can see purpose. If you can reach that point with adults, you have it made. The fifth assumption is orientation to the learning experience. So adults have a problem-centered approach. They want to apply knowledge to a problem. And so if you can give them that hook, then that's another important piece. The sixth is that the whole idea of motivation. Adults are primarily internally rather than externally motivated, although occasionally we see that people are externally motivated. They want to know what they need to know for a test, and that's about all they want to know. And so when they ask that question, they're just they want to know, and they'll reach out and be motivated to that point. For the most part, I think we'll be working with internal motivation, and we'll be doing that in the precepting experience. So often we are working with a student or precepting, when we are precepting, we need to know what are the individual differences that we can detect. So you want to be able to understand the preceptee, and you can apply Knowles' assumptions from the previous slide, and then conduct an analysis. And there are tools for conducting an analysis of a preceptee's needs and strengths. So one of the things you do is look at the individual characteristics, their cognitive abilities, personality, prior knowledge, and their culture. You think about what is the subject matter that we're working on here. You think about the situation. Is it like we're experiencing right now, some e-learning? This may be asynchronous. It will be asynchronous because I'm here today recording this for you to watch on another day. So that's a different type of situation than face-to-face, for instance. And then after you look at that entire picture, you make adjustments and you decide what you need to do in order to address the needs of the individual. Besides looking at the assumptions and conducting an analysis, you always end up by establishing goals and determining the purpose of the learning to frame the experience. What are the objectives for the precepting experience? So I'm going to mention a couple of other theories. We've talked about Knowles. The transformative learning theory by Mesereau, 1991-1997, coincides with Knowles' adult learning theory and is based on the idea that adults arrive with perspective and experience, and when encouraged and challenged, an individual is capable of critical reflection. They might, for instance, challenge their current assumptions, wonder how new knowledge fits with their experience. They might even be able to hit the refresh button and view a new perspective. So I'm going to tell you about a time that this happened to me in a few minutes. So our role as preceptors and teachers is to invite students, new employees, new graduates, into a safe environment where they can develop and flourish. So if you think about transformative learning theory, there are three things that are really important. And one is to know that people come with experience. If challenged, they might become able to critically reflect on something new that they experience, and that they really need to be allowed to develop. And in my opinion, that will cause them to flourish in your setting. So along the way, the preceptee observes and may reproduce model behavior, and that's the Bandura 1969, 1977. Bandura was the first to study and name this process. Social learning theory is a part of how we all learn, especially in nursing. Observation and modeling requires attention, retention, reproduction, and motivation. We learn socially both good and bad behaviors. Students always come back often and report the nurse that took the shortcuts and deviated from safe practice. That said that, well, you're taught the 3 checks and the 5 rights, but really that's not what we do in practice. And so that whole picture of taking shortcuts becomes imprinted on that student until we say, no, those shortcuts are really very dangerous. They can cause an error. So I mentioned that I would tell you a story, about my transformative and actually social learning theory, something that applies here. I was teaching fundamentals in nursing at a tribal college. I had 24 students, some native, some non-native, and the topic I was teaching was therapeutic communication. After the lecture, the students were organized into groups of 3 to practice. I'm sure that many of you can remember practicing therapeutic communication this way. This is not very creative, but this is, we set people up in 3s. There was a patient, a nurse, and an observer for each group. After 10 minutes of practice, based on a written scenario, we stopped to debrief. And so this story is about the 3rd group that was debriefing, and this was Shirley's group. I'm going to talk to you about Shirley. Shirley was from Blackfeet Reservation. She was an LPN, an older student, and she'd come back to become an RN. And she and her group, she was the patient, and there was a younger woman who, her name was Darlene, and she was the nurse in this scenario. And then there was a non-native student named Sue, and she was the observer. And so when we came to the debrief of this group, the observer, Sue, was very disturbed and said, well, you know, we just didn't get very far with our therapeutic communication with our group because the patient spent the whole time interviewing the nurse. And the nurse really didn't get many questions asked of the patient. And so, you know, I was trying to figure out what could have gone wrong because I thought I really taught this concept well. You know, this is how therapeutic communication works. The nurse goes in and begins talking with the patient. And so I asked, and Shirley said, in my culture, it's disrespectful for a younger person to come in and just start interviewing without saying who they are, who they're related to, where they grew up, where on the reservation they lived, who they know. And she said, well, so in 10 minutes, you know, we didn't have time really to begin our respectful communication like we would do on the reservation and with my people. And so I just was transformed at that moment, realizing how ethnocentric my nursing perspective was. We have a lot to learn from students and our preceptees, and that was transformative. I was able to see, and we were able to stop and think about what a wonderful opportunity that was to experience another person's culture and perspective. And, you know, it wasn't necessary that I needed to be right. You know, we all understood that the nurse has their work to do, but we also have to be respectful of the people who we're working with. And so that was a transformative moment for me. And I bring up the Sperry Glacier because, as you can see by observation, in 1913, this camera is in the exact same place. Very interesting to watch the loss of the glacier from Glacier National Park. And this is one particular glacier, and you can see how it's receded. And one of the things that the questions then, you know, why is this happening? How does this occur? What is causing this? And so I thought that was a good image for that particular theory. So we're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs theory. It's based on the premise that an individual would be ready to act on a higher level of growth needs only if the basic needs are met. And Ulrich refers to Maslow's hierarchy of needs on page 21. So the original model contained 5 levels. The new model added 3 areas that enhanced the model's application to precepting, including cognitive, just below self-actualization, cognitive needs, for knowledge, meaning, and self-awareness. To me, that is really important when we think about students and precepting. The aesthetic, beauty, balance, and form, also important. to achieve that before you reach self-actualization or personal growth and self-fulfillment. And I think that the addition of transcendence, helping others to self-actualize, that's actually where I picture preceptors, teachers, and nurses often. When we are working with others, trying to help the act of precepting others and contributing to the nursing profession, I feel like that's reaching a very high level on Maslow's chart. If you think about the critical importance of protecting the safety and esteem needs of a new employee, a student, or a new graduate, you look at just above the biological, physiological needs. We just assume people come ready with that in place, having the right air, food, the right water to drink, safe water, shelter, warmth, sex, sleep. Those are all basic needs. And then the next level up, safety and belongingness and esteem, those areas are where often we start with our preceptees and students. And if we can help them achieve those needs of feeling safe in our environment, belonging to our group, and not being an outsider, helping them achieve and do well in a setting by giving them places where they can accomplish things, then I think we've really served our students and our preceptees well. This is another theory that I think really applies, of course, to precepting. I really encourage everyone to read this snippet of information Ulrich provides on Patricia Benner's novice to expert theory of skill acquisition and development, and that's on page 23 of your reading. And in particular, table 2.2 on page 23. Or better yet, you can check out her book, her 1984 book. The whole experiential learning provides the bridge between the levels of novice to expert, novice, advanced, beginner, competent, proficient, expert. So this model is very situational. The individual in this slide may be an expert downhill skier, about to win the gold medal, but might be a novice on the tennis court. You might be an expert nurse in the operating room, but a novice if your work assignment required all OR nurses make a post-op home visit. You may be a novice at making home visits, but an expert in the OR. So I think it's important for all of us, especially as we get better and better at what we do, whether it's teaching or precepting or being a nurse on a unit where we've worked a long time and gained a lot of skill. You put me over in the OR right now, and I would be a novice, maybe a pre-novice. And so it's really just very important to realize that we move all the time if we're growing and developing. We move between these areas. And it's not just a pure science, okay, you're a novice and now you're an expert because you had this much experience, because you could be easily a novice again. Important to remember that. For activity 1, and I'm going to mention several activities, and on the resources on the Montana Con website under Module 3, there will be a link to Benner's Novice to Expert chart that comes from the National Council of State Boards of Nursing, 2011, Transition to Practice Preceptor Toolkit, which I'm going to provide a link for you all. Wonderful resources there, but this is just a one-page explanation of stages from novice to expert, the 5 stages, orientee characteristics or preceptee characteristics in each of these phases, and then preceptor implication. And so this one page, I think, will be really valuable and helpful to you as you move forward. As humans, we all receive and process information based on needs and preferences. In nursing, we call the trilogy knowledge, skills, and attitude, KSAs. And we hope for balance among all three. But we know that all three are developmental processes, sort of a novice to expert type of process, and might occur independently or concurrently. So you can have, if we think back at the example of the IV stars, it was very important for the nurses to understand cognitively, have their mental skills, their knowledge skills taken care of so they understand the reason and purpose and some of the background for IV starts. And then they have the psychomotor and physical skills that go with that. And then they adopt the right attitude for caring for others. You know, what is someone feeling? What am I feeling? How nervous am I as I try to attempt this? And so all of those skills, not maybe developing at the same level. Quite frankly, they were more interested in their psychomotor skills than they were the cognitive or affective. But that will come along. And we know that we will see that eventually the balance of the concurrence of all of these things happening is when we see success in practice. Nurses have experience teaching patients based on the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domains of learning. We know that cognition emerges from simple to complex, and so the simple would be in cognition just knowledge. We talked often about someone may be able to answer a knowledge question, or maybe even indicate that they can comprehend what the idea is. And a higher level would be application or analysis, and the highest would be to be able to take a concept and synthesize it and evaluate it. And so that's the highest level, and that's what we try to bring our students to, not just to be able to regurgitate knowledge, but to be able to use it and apply it and synthesize it. In terms of psychomotor skills, that requires the integration of mental and muscular activity. So in terms of, you can learn to throw a pot on a wheel or start an IV. Along the way, you realize the steps associated with that first learning experience. So I remember seeing my daughter pick a mound of clay and put it on a wheel and started that wheel, and that clay flew off onto the side of the wall. She eventually got very good and could actually put a pot together like this. But you realize what kind of psychomotor skills that takes. You need practice, and you need the integration of your skills. And you can often, if you have a person there to help you, you can benefit from observation and feedback. That's always something we like to see, is to provide feedback. This is what you did really well. If you did this a little different, that's one of the things we saw with the IV starts, is people were giving others ideas about how to hold the arm, how to position the needle, and so pretty soon they were doing much better. I just had one of the students that was in that practice come back, and she was in the ER this week, and she said she started an IV in a situation that was really challenging, and she was able to be successful. And so that was very thrilling for all of us. The affective domain deals with expression of feelings and acceptance of attitudes, opinions, and values, and involves also simple to complex behaviors. We often, the simplest is just receiving information. Next is responding, then valuing, organizing, and characterizing. So strategies to enhance the affective and cognitive domain includes, for instance, storytelling. A few minutes ago, I told you about the Blackfeet communication story where I learned something. This storytelling is really a powerful tool, and you can often use this with preceptors. When you see something done well, or if someone fails and there's a problem with something that they did, you can often, many of us can remember things that happened to us. And so the preceptor can do the storytelling, or, we can ask the preceptee to say, what was this like that you just did this? Was there anything in your past that you have experienced before like this? One other tool for the affective domain strategy is journaling. And I often think it's one of the things we do that really is very revealing and helpful to us. So if you had a preceptee and you asked them to journal on the first few days of their experience when they have a chance, thinking back what went well, what they do differently, that's one of the ways if you can strengthen how much someone's learned is by looking back. Confrontation can be done in a kind way. After someone maybe needs to change their approach, you can say, okay, here's what I saw. What did you think about that? And so you can confront and still be kind, and you can change behavior that way. We often ask people to clarify their values when they're having trouble taking care of someone, for instance, from a different culture, or maybe with a certain condition. We ask them to clarify what was the problem, where did you experience that barrier. Perceptual techniques, I'm trying to ask how do you perceive this? What do you think of this? So those are just some tools that you can be thinking of. So another tool is just understanding the difference between field independent and field dependent learners. Field independent learners tend to be very analytical and logical. They're less influenced by authority and social attachments and external standards. They're intrinsically motivated, and they actually guided by their own values. And so, that is one way of describing a field-independent person, and you can kind of think, well, where is this person right now? A field-dependent learner may be less defined by their sense of autonomy and independence. They might be extrinsically motivated, relying on an external frame of reference for information and guidance. These are not necessarily one bad or one good. They are differences. Now, a lot of times I feel very field-dependent because I want to see the entire picture before I make a decision on things. And I've always thought of that as field-dependent. But I'm also in some circumstances, a lot of circumstances, field-independent as well. So we can vary. Gregoric mentions the other types of learners, and I don't like any of these definitions because I can never remember them. I just know that some people, they happen to be called concrete sequential. They're direct, orderly. They like step-by-step instructions. They would prefer to use workbooks and computer instructions have to be very specific. If you encounter someone that is concrete sequential, you just may want to be aware that they can't seem to get past where they need to be because they don't have enough instruction right immediately where they are. And so they might need a different type. You might have to take a different approach. Concrete random is people trial and error, flexibility, problem solving. So often simulation is a good or independent study for the concrete random person. Abstract sequential people are analytical. They like logical approaches. They may like group discussion to talk about the impact and the reasons for things. And then the abstract random is more holistic, unstructured learning is a very important part of that. So just understanding that there are different types of learners with different types of needs is important. So Kolb puts it all together for us. And this is the last theory, I'm happy to tell you. But I feel like these are also important to know because this is the basis for which people are gathering information and making decisions all the time. So Kolb talks about the learning cycle, and that's on page 29 of your reading. The learning cycle involves, first of all, a process continuum and a perception continuum. And one of the first processes is the concrete experience, feeling, learning from experience, relating to people. The second is reflective observation, where you're watching and looking for meaning. The next thing that would be abstract conceptualization. You're thinking, logically analyzing ideas, and acting on intellectual understanding and curiosity. And then active experimentation, where you're doing and getting things done by influencing people, events, and risk-taking. So for activity 2, I would encourage you to go to the resources section of the Module 3 on the website and check out the complete the learning style inventory on the resource tab. It's very helpful. There is a tool that I'll post there that talks about all 4, and of course these are they're independent. You can be strong in one area and weaker in another, depending on, again, the situation and what you're trying to accomplish. But this is a tool for evaluating your preceptee, and it's also very useful for us to take and understand what kind of teacher am I, what kind of preceptor am I, what is my preference, and what is my approach that I tend to be one or another of this from the cycle. So in terms of precepting strategies, and this is more in Chapter 3, where these are really important. We want to be sure we understand the employer and the employee pre-precepting discussion points that an individual needs to be aware of as you go into precepting, and you are precepting, I'm sure, students. Just being aware, and you want to look at table 3.1, it's on page 36 in your reading. This is really important information, and clarifications need to be made right from the very start before you begin the precepting experience with preceptees. So regardless of the preceptor model, whether it's a single, you have one-on-one, or you might be two-on-one, you might have 2 preceptors, 2 preceptees to 1 preceptor, or 1 preceptee, 1 new employee might be distributed among 2 or 3 people. But whatever the model is, you want to be sure that you're very clear about the expected outcomes, preceptor role requirements,